So, a common concern that we see in being a client magnet is, especially for coaches that are somewhat new in their career, is a hesitancy to create a deep connection with somebody in a conversation that would lead to a coaching conversation. We call this the first conversation, the conversation before what we call the second ask, which is the ask to receive the explicit experience of coaching, or if it's some other service, the experience of your expertise. And a lot of times we see people holding back because they don't want to ask deep questions or coaching questions because they don't want to be rude. And some people out there in the coaching world say you should never coach without permission. I don't buy that really, because I think most people are asking permission from a fear of not being good enough, not having permission. I mean, that just propagates more fear in the world. So I'm kind of like, fuck that. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. One of my favorite metaphors. The bathwater is the fear, the social conditioning, the idea that you're not supposed to do certain things, or that would be rude, right? It's not the action that's rude. It's the context and the intent that makes something rude. A member of my team brought this up this morning and asked me to give some insight on it. I said, like, grabbing a woman's body is rude most of the time, in most contexts, under most intentions. But there are certain contexts in which it's not rude. When you've built trust and you built connection with my wife, it's rude to grab my wife's body in some situations, it's rude, but in some it's not. And so am I paying attention to the context? Am I creating a context in which it's appropriate? Am I creating a context in which it's appropriate? So the baby is the concern, the care for this person's safety, for this person's comfort, for this person's readiness. But if you believe that this person's comfort, safety, and readiness is a product of circumstances that are outside of your power, then you're leaving your capacity to create to circumstance. Well, this isn't a situation where I can say that kind of thing, so I guess it would just be rude. But here's the thing, the context that's living outside of you is created by you, by the way that you see it as one part of it, which informs your state of being and your attitude and your way of meeting the world, which impacts everybody around you, which influences their experience of the context. So it's not a static thing. A context is dynamic, it's alive, it's breathing, and it's changing moment by moment. And so if you want to be in a context in which it's not rude to ask a coaching question, to ask something very deep and personal, right? Because most of the time people are like struggling to get a person to a point, not most of the time, but some of the times people are struggling to get a person to the point where they would be an excited yes to the invitation to an explicit coaching conversation, because they're just having a very surface level chat, a very socially acceptable dialogue. And it's really kind of like, why would you want to schedule a time in the calendar to have a conversation so we could just have right here and right now? It just feels weird and awkward. But if you open up a really deep and intimate conversation, the kind of conversation that doesn't typically happen in a social context, whether it's through a DM chat in social media or when you're out and about somewhere and you meet somebody at a coffee shop, and suddenly you're asking them really deep and personal questions, you're asking them questions that bring them face to face with their fear. It's like, at that point, it's really awkward to continue this here. I would much prefer to schedule a time and place somewhere else to be in this conversation. That's where you want a person to be before you invite them into that context. So how do you get them to there? You must be saying things that in most situations, most of the time, would be considered rude, and not leave it up to the situation being something that exists out there. How do you transform the situation? How do you create a space with your way of being that has what would otherwise be considered a rude question be not just palatable, but welcome? So at the essence, it's your intent, why you're asking what you're asking. Because when you deeply enough come from care and love and concern for another person, you can pretty much say or ask anything. If you have love in your heart for them, if you're so outside of your own concerns about your own self and you're so focused on them and you're looking at this person, maybe it's on the other side of a counter in some kind of commercial exchange, and it's a situation where normally you do how are you? Good. How are you? Oh, I'm good. How's the weather? Blah blah blah. Just like inane surface level stuff. And you look at them in their eyes, and you can see something is bothering them. And you think to yourself, well, that would be rude. I can't ask about that. And you look at them in the eyes and you think, my God, this person has a daughter, has a son, has a mother, has a father, has siblings. They have their own life story, their own challenge, and you actually let your heart break for them in that moment. And you allow yourself to care more about helping them in this moment than any concerns about what people might think of you. And you have that much love in your heart, and you look them in the eyes and you said you're doing well, but you don't look like you're doing well. Are you really okay? What's going on? The ground starts to shake, and they're like, who are you? Number one, how did you even notice that? Number two, how do you have the courage to ask me that thing that's so unsocially unacceptable? And number three, how do you care so much about me? Because I can feel that you do. All of those ideas can be communicated through the power of your intent. And when you communicate them through the power of your intent, which is like, I can't give you a how-to manual on what should I say so that people think that I care. That's the thing, so that they think that I care. Look, you care for people, they'll know. And they know that you don't care. We've got millions of years of conditioning and evolution to give us the capacity to know whether or not that entity out there cares about me or not. You can see it in animals, not just people. I mean, there's nothing that we're better at figuring out from a distance, like the way that we use our pupils and energy and all that stuff. So you don't have to know how to do it. You just have to care. So if you have a how question, well, how do I care? Well, then that's what the essence of our work is in being a client magnet, right? If you're in the program, you know that. We look at who are you being that's blocking the natural, authentic expression of love and care. Once we set you free from that, love happens. Love pours out of you. People can feel it. And when a person feels loved by you, you can pretty much say or do anything. There is no more rude, right? To go back to my relationship with my wife, most of the time, sorry it's a weird metaphor, but me physically grabbing her isn't rude, especially when it's coming from love, because the love is so present. If it's not present, it is rude, and she won't like it. But most of the time, the love is present. And so, but that can be created with anybody. Now, I'm not saying you go around physically grabbing people. You have to create a lot of love and safety for that. But to say things that are outside the normal context, to look somebody in the eyes and to speak to them like they're your best friend, or they're like your brother or your sister, and you treat them that way because you care about them that much, they'll feel it. It changes the context, and suddenly what would be rude otherwise isn't. It isn't. And so I invite you to keep your concerns about being rude. Keep them. There's wisdom in them. It's called care. And find out what it is that you're afraid of. Peel behind that, because I'm afraid of it because I care that what? Give them that. Fall in love with them. Let your heart break for them. Love a stranger and they will not be a stranger, and then nothing is rude. So that's how you be not rude to ask deep and powerful and confronting and challenging coaching questions of people that you don't know or you just met, in situations where if anybody else asked them, it would be awkward and uncomfortable and inappropriate because that person isn't connected to their care as much. They're narcissistic and they're asking it from their own self-interest. And so, yeah, it is rude in that case, but you don't have to be that. Be loving, be free. I love you. Have fun. If you have challenges with this, come back with more questions. Talk to you soon.